Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon. This is the show where I take a look at every classic Doctor Who story, plus a bunch of Big Finish audio dramas, one episode a day, 7 days a week. Now, today on the 19th of July, 2020, we're starting to look at the first story in the final, the final trilogy of the Olderness arc, Doctor Who Mistfall. Now, before we begin, I just wanted to make sure everyone knew and understood that because in 2019 YouTube was caught data mining the information of underage users, therefore violating the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, or COPPA, they implemented a new policy meant to scapegoat creators. As such, it means I have to ensure that everyone understands that this video is not meant for children. It's not marketed towards kids. It is not advertised to kids. Viewer discretion is advised. That being said, we're starting Mistfall with part 1. So, Mistfall already is an interesting premise. The cover proudly displays the Marshman from Full Circle, and it isn't very long before in this first episode, the characters are all, the Doctor and company are back in E-Space. Now, it's actually picked up right where Prisoners of Fate left off, with Nyssa wanting to go see her child, her daughter Nika, so they, but, the TARDIS then starts to have a mind of its own, and ends up back in E-Space and back on Alzarius, where the Marshmen are. So, Mistfall Part 1 is very odd, because it kind of contradicts, it kind of completely contradicts what the entire point of Full Circle was. It's not a, the entire point of Full Circle ends with them going full circle on Alzarius and leaving, but this time there are people from New Alzarius back on Alzarius, and, well, doing this sort of different little thing for the story, because for reasons like they are, doing, they're doing this very different idea, because of that, and there could be something interesting about it, but this first episode doesn't have a lot here. A lot of it's building up to the point where the Marshmen rise from the deep. There are experiments being done on the Marshmen. Again, much like the experiments of the Deciders, there are Deciders back. Gemma Redgrave, who would play Kate Stewart in the revived unit, in the Revive series, as the quote-unquote daughter of basically the, basically that's what the characters have become, and sort of that's why they're back, and I don't entirely think that's, I don't think that's what the story should be going for. This episode is really, really short. It only runs in at 22 minutes. Again, it goes on. There's a very a very different thing. Um, you know, and I don't entirely disagree with what the story is doing, but it's not doing everything right or interestingly. Like Nissa and Turlo have their own plot with New Elzarians, which doesn't go anywhere this episode. Like it's just sort of like there, like in the background, like, oh, here's this other plot that's not unrelated to our hero's plot, but really the Doctor and Tegan are the main thrust here, which is actually kind of a mistake. We should still be focusing on Nisha's emotional arc here, which is a shame that we aren't, because that's where the story shines. We're coming right off of Prisoners of Fate, where you have that emotional arc that through line that needs to be fulfilled, and because it isn't being fulfilled, you're missing out on what makes the story work. And again, a lot of this episode is a retread of topics in full circle. Which doesn't make for the most interesting story. It doesn't make for the characters to be interesting in that way, because we already have full circle. Full circle is already a story. Now, the episode's not bad. It's good. It's perfectly serviceable. It tells a plot. It has some intrigue, some interest. Even if said interest is in the background, and the experiments on the Marshman are interesting, and what makes and there is the mystery of why did the TARDIS come back to E-space, and what are the Marshmen doing? Why are the experiments happening? Those are interesting enough through lines. They're through lines with enough power to at least affect some sort of an emotion. But on the whole, this is just an enjoyable episode. It's not great. It's not knocking it out of the park. It's a step down from the previous story, and which is a real shame. So overall, I'm going to give part 1 of Mistfall a 6 out of 10. Alright, it is the 20th of July 2020, and I just finished listening to part 2 of Mistfall. Okay. Yeah. Okay, we're getting a difficult episode to talk about. That's always fun. Okay, so how do I want to do this? There are a couple of things about this episode that are perfectly fine. The performances are as good as they can be. But Gemma Redgrave in particular actually does a really good job on audio, and it at least makes me, and as someone who has not listened to any of the unit stuff, it makes me kind of want to at least, though owning, I think, like the first box set, because it was in a bundle I bought, in a humble bundle for really, really cheap, like for like $15, I think. So, among other things, so like, that's a thing. We're going to talk about Mistfall. She's good. She's good in this. Janet Fielding, as always, is a delight. There really is just about everything that the story tries to do. And yeah, that's pretty much that's pretty much all I can say. Yeah, that's all I can say about the good stuff. The performances are nice. Because, well, this story isn't it isn't great. you know, it's a mess. This is one of those stories where you have the plot and you have the semblance of an idea, but nothing great, nothing good to get you done. This is basically a retread of Full Circle, like beat for beat. The beats are there, and honestly, you could do better, very, very probably. And the first episode wasn't so bad. There was maybe some ideas with experimentations on the Marshman, and the idea of a sentient Marshman who can speak, who's sort of halfway Marshman, halfway human, is it's okay. It's all right. It's an idea, but it's not. It's not a necessary thing, and it's something that I think you just Andrew Smith is someone who, well, someone who should know better. He should have done something that is well worth it, and generally just more thought being put into things. Like there isn't the there isn't the full story. It's just this idea, and there isn't anything other than that. Like, you have the river fruit spiders that attack Tegan in this one, and you basically are like, it's basically here are a bunch of elements from, well, from Full Circle that, you probably know. It's basically do you remember Full Circle? Well, you're going to remember Full Circle because that's what the story has become. It's let's remember Full Circle. Let's rewrite Full Circle. Let's do Full Circle. And it doesn't say anything interesting about it. The entire mystery of why the TARDIS was dragged off course is just sort of dropped here. It's led into the complete background, which I get if the story were doing something interesting or fun or cool or even just different from the rest, but it's not. The story's just sort of being there, but it's Full Circle. Do you know the story Full Circle? You have listened to Mistfall Part 2. This episode is just really short, and looking at the length of this episode, it's 19 minutes. It's not a lot of time for an episode. Now, I get it. You don't want to necessarily make your episode overrun, but you could have done something. You have an audio. You have something more for the time. And the first episode was only 22 minutes, and the last two aren't much longer. They're not your standard 25 minutes. It's very much a quick, quote-unquote, snappy kind of story that even with that, I don't love what it has, what it has done. There with the plot, because there isn't much of a plot. It's just, here's an idea, let's play with it, and there we go. That's all we got. So yeah, you lose it. I mean, there are a few things that are slightly enjoyable. So yeah, overall, I'm gonna have to give Part 2 of Mistfall a 3 out of 10. Just because the more I think about it, the more I dislike it. Hey, it's the 20th of July, still, 2020. I just finished listening to part 4 of Mistfall, and oh yeah, this doesn't get better. It doesn't get any better. It also doesn't get any worse. Mainly, okay, some of the things are are still incredibly derivative, and yes, you're gonna hear me complaining about how most of the entire story is derivative of Full Circle, but there's one or two in things about this sort of story and a lot of things that the story kind of does that are interesting enough, though not the best. There are still a lot of a lot of there are a lot of things here that just don't necessarily work as well as perhaps as the story thinks it does. There's a lot here that's just a bit off and not perfect, and I don't hate the story for it. Story's not bad, it's just kind of a mess, which is okay for things to be a mess, but it's it's just not as amazing or as good or really as fun as perhaps the story thinks it is. It's just sort of there. Like this cliffhanger does the whole spiders thing. There is a little bit of different stuff here, mainly because, well, the characters basically have their have their story, have their story to be told, and it's a solid story. Even if it isn't perfect, the story is there, and there is enough. There are just a lot of things that this story needs to do better to really make it as a plot, or even just it reads as bad. The whole I will say the whole Marshman that is in between humans and sort of Marshman is interesting, and what's interesting is that then it eventually there's a Marshman here that then learns how to speak and is able to communicate, and you get that you get that little aspect of the plot, which is, good and honestly fun. Fun to have, fun to see something like that, as part of the plot to and make interesting. And there's like this idea of a sanctity at the heart of Alzarius. That's one thing which I adding sort of a religious element to the plot is, well, it's what at least makes this story feel a bit more, feel a bit, a bit more like there is something there, and something different, and something enjoyable. You don't entirely have to deal with, but you don't entirely, you can't ignore. Yeah, and there is something solid. It's solid, and it's enjoyable because of that. But other than that, it's not good. There isn't much interesting. You have, decent performances from the characters, but not decent enough to be like, okay, here's something cool and new, and interesting, and you don't get the entire story. You just get the plot. I don't. Again, it's not perfect. It's just not. It's just there. So overall, I'm going to give. Well, I'm gonna have to give part 3 of Mistfall another 3 out of 10, because this is just weak and really weak. Okay, it's the what's the date? It's the 21st of July 2020. I just finished listening to part 4 of Mistfall. Yeah, yeah, this is bad. More than bad. Very, 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 not good. So, Mistfall is... I don't entirely know how to say this. So, and here's the difficulty with talking about Mistfall. It's all basically a retread of Full Circle. That's since part 2. I think I've been saying it in part 1, but it wasn't nearly as bad in part 1 because there were a couple of ideas there, and a couple of things there to keep it going, keep the story moving, which would be fine and okay if it perhaps wasn't for just what the story ends up doing. This is an episode where I can't really take what the story's doing seriously, because it just does the same stuff from Full Circle. It doesn't end with them going off, but it ends with the Marshman defeated, though not dead this time, and peacefully this time. So that is slightly different, but not enough that it actually the differences really mean anything. Just enough to claim okay, here's something different about this plot, and here's something weird, and yeah, it's one of those things where there is um, where there is just about everything being this absolutely giant sort of story, and it doesn't just do much. There are, I mean, the villain makes us to the end, which is, I guess, nice. Um, but yeah, it's really a lot of what the story is doing. Uh, and who the characters are. There just isn't a lot here where I can say it's solid and good and amazing sort of thing. It's just this. It's it's just this weird little thing. I I don't think it works. The story, that is, it's just sort of there. It's not telling the actual plot. It's it's just this. It's just this weird. It's just. It's just this weird little story that I don't think. I don't think ends well. There's some setup right near the end, all about basically being like, okay, um, here's where the next story is going with the 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 absolute, just sort of idea that it plays around with, having, the dimensional stabilizer being out of the star, so that they'll never leave E-space, and because it was stolen, though I don't know how they're going to get it back. It's just kind of, again, there without actually doing anything. Um, but yeah, it's a story that's just about where the story kind of goes. Like, it doesn't end great. It's just sort of, it's just sort of there, you know, and you kind of get the feeling that there could have been something amazing here, but it never ever actually goes for it. So overall, I'm gonna have to give part 4 of Mistfall a 2 out of 10. That being said, we added the scores and averaged them out to give Mistfall a final score of 3.5 out of 10, leaving the episode as definitely one of the weaker installments in the Olderness arc. That being said, thank you everybody for watching this installment of the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon. As always, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already, and join me next time when we take a look at the penultimate Olderness story with a story from Matt Fitton called Equilibrium.